Hey everyone, it's Kong again with another episode of Should You Summon. As always, this video doesn't present in-depth guides or builds for these characters, but simply high-level overviews using these 4 criteria to help you decide whether it's worth spending your hard-earned crystals and vouchers on these 2 characters. How they fit into your team, whether they unlock any bonds, what kind of content they get used for, and their future availability. So let's hop right into this Raid Up banner featuring Zerida and Clarett. It's important to remember that this is not a Destiny banner, so it's definitely possible to summon off-banner heroes even on your first SSR. So first let's look at Zerida. She's one of the game's premier assassins. Her talent passively boosts her crit rate, and further increases crit rate, reduces damage taken, and increases mobility if you end your turn outside the danger zone. At 6 star, you can get 4 additional mobility, which greatly increases her ability to go wherever she wants and hit whomever she wants. She has a couple of popular builds thanks to a variety of mean skills that she can mix and match, including abilities that let her ignore guard or move again after defeating an enemy. She also has a unique helm in the Secret Realm store that heals her and removes a debuff if she ends her turn away from her allies. King's Crown is still arguably her best helm, but there are lots of units that compete for those, so this could be a viable choice if you have some extra Secret Realm points. She's a member of Dark Reincarnation, buffed by Bozel, Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida, and Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizerov, and Tree Sage. That's right, Tree Sage Landius is the upcoming 2nd Mythical Realm buffer. I'll talk more about him in the next Langrisser Lookout Community News Roundup next week. So not only does she carry her own faction buff, but she's currently the only Meteor Strike faction buffer. This means she's quite self-reliant and can slot comfortably into almost any team, then go off and do her own thing. Her fusion power increases damage dealt by 10% if you're not within 1 space of an ally, and it lets you move 2 spaces after defeating an enemy, and heals 20% at the end of your action. For bonds, Zerida unlocks the attack bonds for Farakia and Yulia. For her own bonds, she doesn't need any SSR characters. Actually, she doesn't need anyone at all to unlock her own bonds. You just need to upgrade her to each of her tier 3 classes. Now for content. In PvE, she's technically on faction for Leviar and Scylla in Eternal Temple, and for Jormungandr and Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning. But you don't tend to see her used very often in those modes because she's designed more for erasing targets rather than piling damage on bosses. Now, this is the exact reason you do see her a lot in joint battles, and she can be useful in some challenges as well. Where she really shines though is in PvP. Not only is she a great assassin, but she and other characters like her are also great counters to other Zeridas. Her long reach helps zone out opponents and prevent her from activating her talent. She's also top shelf ban bait, but that said, if you do manage to deploy a well-built Zerida, then you gain a lot of influence over the pace of the match. For availability, she should be coming back on a Destiny banner with Rainforce and Gizerov in mid-September. So next let's take a look at Clarett. She's one of the game's premier flying slayers. Her talent boosts her damage and reduces her damage taken, but most importantly, it stocks up any unused movement for your next turn. This means at 6 star, if you end your turn without moving, you can get a full 5 additional movement for your next turn. This makes her one of the most dangerous long-range threats in PvP in particular. She's a member of Princess Alliance, buffed by Luna and Shelfaniel, Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida, and Yles Legends, buffed by Landius and Sigma. For bonds, she unlocks the attack bond for SR character Alfred. For her own bonds, she needs Luna for her defensive bond and Sigma for her attack bond. For content, in PvE, she's on faction for Leviar, Scylla, and Phoenix in the Eternal Temple, and her long-range slaying ability could make her useful for the latter too. She's also on faction for Needhog, and particularly useful against Jormungandr in Ancient Beckoning. In general use PvE, she could also be a helpful treasure hunter, darting off to hidden chests while the rest of your team does the hard work of fighting enemies. In PvP, she's a dangerous, top-tier unit, thanks to her talent allowing her to stack up a turn's worth of additional mobility. This can be very oppressive, and usually ends up giving her a tasty assortment of possible targets. Lightning Flash allows her to act again with reduced damage if she fails to finish off an enemy. For availability, Clarett should be coming back on a Valentine's event trade-in banner with Sigma in mid-July. So, just to wrap up, we have Zerida, who's a top-tier PvP assassin who's currently the sole faction buffer for Meteor Strike. She unlocks the attack bonds for Ferrakia and Yulia. We also have Clarett, who's a top-tier flying slayer in PvP with excellent threat range. She unlocks the attack bond for Alfred. Overall, these are two of the most used characters in high-level PvP. If you're interested in getting into PvP and you don't have either character, it could be worth summoning here, with the usual caveat that nothing is guaranteed on a non-focus banner like this. Alright, before I get into my final notes on upcoming banners, I do want to just share some notes on the current Record of Lodoss War tie-in equipment banner that's running alongside this current one. I'm not really going to go into too much detail on each of these pieces of gear, because that's not really the point of this video, but I will mention a couple of key points, and that should hopefully give you enough information to go off and do your own research. So this equipment banner features the Azure Legend armor, the Witch's Reminiscence headgear, the Twilight Star accessory, and the Scarlet Reaper axe. The Azure Legend armor gives 10% max hit points, like the Demon Lizard skin, plus some additional defensive stats depending on your health. So people will be tempted to use it on fixed damage HP meme Listels, but Last Rites remains the better option for her. Still, I know that a lot of people aren't absolutely swimming in Last Rites, so this will definitely be an option for Listel. The Witch's Reminiscence headgear is basically a variation of the Yggdrasil Wreath. Instead of boosting an ally's magic defense, it boosts their skill. And instead of immunizing against stun and movement reduction, it immunizes against heal reversal and unable to act again effects. It could be interesting to partner this with someone who follows Omega around to try to bump his skill up to new heights. The Twilight Star is an interesting accessory that gives attack and int boosts, and deals a small jolt of fixed damage before combat. This ignores fixed damage immunity if the enemy's using mixed troops, so for example Yulia with unicorns. It'll mostly be used to break max HP damage reduction effects from stuff like Last Rites. But I can see some dedicated PvP players trying to add a couple copies of this to their arsenal. Finally, the Scarlet Reaper is an axe that deals fixed damage after actively dealing damage, which means this also procs on AoE attacks. Which means this is probably going to be the best in-slot weapon for AoE-focused Ares builds, or basically any axe user whose role isn't to break Last Rites with Ragnarok and then one-shot a single target. I feel like Ares in particular is the intended user for this weapon because his main setup involves him doing 2 AoE attacks. So all of that comes with the usual caveats about equipment banners being kind of a trap for your vouchers. Generally, usually only recommended for players who are deep endgame or heavily PvP focused, who don't necessarily need to budget as many of their vouchers towards getting new characters. These players can usually afford to go after specific things that will enable them to be even more competitive. Even then, with the number of great characters showing up on banners lately, it's kinda hard to recommend using your vouchers on gear. So speaking of which, I'll talk now about some upcoming banners. As I mentioned, the next few weeks are going to be loaded with top tier heroes, so it's time to knuckle down and get those Trinity voucher budget spreadsheets ready. First, we'll have a Destiny banner featuring Juglar, Landius, and Yulia. Juglar and Landius are both PvP essentials, the game's 2 meta-dominant tanks. They're both extremely solid for PvE content as well, and Yulia is also an excellent overall unit. After that, we'll see the ballyhooed launch of new characters Ares and Maya from Langrisser Reincarnation Tensei. Ares brings some of the biggest meta-defining potential in a long time with his ability to pass through opponents, and his bannermate Maya is required for his attack bonds. For extra fun, the Ares and Juglar Landius Yulia banners should overlap by a week, so if there are specific characters you're focusing on, you should be able to bounce back and forth between them to ensure you get who you want. I've heard people saying that if you want to have Ares 6-star by the time the Season 4 playoffs come around, then you'll need to pull 3 copies of him on this banner, so that's something to think about as well if you're hoping to have him PvP ready. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful. As always, let me know in the comments if you're summoning and how it went. Personally, I don't have Clarett, and I've been farming Zerida's Gates of Fate, so either unit would be a nice boost for me here. Still, in light of that conversation about upcoming banners, I do kinda need to stick to my guns and keep hoarding my vouchers for some of those characters. So I'll probably try to summon 1 SSR from this banner. Hopefully I'll get someone in only a few tickets. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next Should You Summon.